Testing. Sorry to keep you waiting. Complicated business doing these live streams. Sorry to keep you waiting. So today we are talking about the magic of Malini. Let me set up my frame here so you guys can see me and so that I'm comfortable, because we're going to be going into it talking about this book right here. This copy that I have, first of all, I'll show you the copy, then we'll get into the book. Somebody brought it to me after one of my shows in London. This was in January, I believe, or maybe February. And this is printed by Supreme, which was a magic dealer back in the day, a magic book publisher. I believe there were 2 or 3 different versions of this that came out. By the way, my dust jacket is in shambles. Here's the front half that's come off. I'll put that over here for now. I have to sort of restore it since it is busted. And here is the back, which is sort of stuck onto the book. It's so old that and water damage that it's sort of stuck onto the book. But there's the back half of the dust jacket with Vernon, and they're advertising other books that they published back in those days by Lewis Ganson. This is the book without the dust jacket. It's really nice. It sort of has this gold foil. The writing is in this gold foil. Not a very strong gold foil, but it's a very simple design. I really like the quality of these old-time magic books. They really do look nice. So that's the outside of the book. It's not a big book. It's about 107 pages. Let's go into the book. I have a bunch of notes that I sort of printed out and wrote these last couple of days. I've read the book many times, but on this most recent run through, I took a bunch of notes to share with you guys. So that's what we'll be going through. Let me try to position my camera so you guys can see everything all right. Do that over here. I have so many books and stuff on my couch. Please ignore those things. All right, so I'll sort of go through my notes one page at a time and talk about the book. Let's do that together. So, about Max Malini. Max Malini was a legendary guy. Not a lot of magicians like him. In the whole history of magic, he was sort of unique in that the public had no idea who he was. He did not really do big shows for the public in theaters. He has performed in theaters. He just wasn't known for that. He wasn't a magician who toured theaters, getting publicity, being in the newspapers, and doing big shows like most magicians did back in those days. He would mostly perform for rich people, for presidents, people of the upper class, the elite, and that's how he made his living. That's sort of what he did. Malini, let's open the book and go. Let's go through it because I want to make sure that I got everything down. So this edition of the book that I have right here, printed in England. Supreme was an English magic publishing company back in the day, published by Harry Stanley at his unique magic studio. And what edition is this? I swear I remember this saying there was an edition attached to this, but I don't see an edition. I know that there's more than one edition because I've seen other copies that have different dust jackets. So I will have to do some research on that. Let's start at the beginning of the book. Guy Vernon claims to, on the first page of the book, the foreword, claims to have been as close to anybody to Max Malini. We know historically that this is false. Max Malini, I can't place them ever together. Probably other people can. I know that Guy Vernon lied a lot. And there are many, many people who say that Max Malini was never friends with Guy Vernon. Max Malini's own son claimed that Guy Vernon was not good friends with his father, Max Malini. So we're going to sort of read into that as we go through the book. I just think it's important to note right off the bat, just so you guys have that as background information. And we can talk about why Guy Vernon would have wanted to pretend to be his friend and all those things, but let's get into it. Malini was extremely well known by certain people back in those days. He used to go into bars and introduce himself. My name is Max Malini. I'm the greatest magician in the world. And like he would just announce himself. I don't know if he would stand up on a table, but he would barge into whatever establishment he was. And he was just such a character that he could just make an introduction like that and pretty much hijack the situation. Everybody would want to talk to him, see magic. And he would present himself as what he was, which is a legendary magician. So he would say, yes, I performed for this queen and that king, and I've performed here in this country and that country, and I've done this and this. And the people wanted to know his stories because he was sort of a legendary guy. He wasn't famous. There wasn't fame back there then like there was today. There was, but he wasn't famous in a celebrity way. He was more famous in a way sort of like Evel Knievel. Like Evel Knievel wasn't a celebrity. He was just a legendary guy who celebrities wanted to be around because he was, so awesome. Stories about Evel Knievel, walking to bars and everybody wanted to speak to him. It's not because he was like, had a TV show or was doing movies. It's because everybody knew that this was a legendary guy. And Malini was sort of that same type of character. He's written about in many non-magic history and biographical books. Some of them are mentioned throughout this book, and we can get into the crediting later because I'm doing a lot of what I'm doing for myself is compiling a bunch of research on Malini to see where he's mentioned outside of magic sources and within magic sources, and get all that information compiled in a folder because it's really thin, this book. And this is the only book really written on Malini, which is kind of sad. So we're going through the foreword now, and it's just sort of giving the history of the book and how this book was made. It was made based on a series of recordings from Vernon and who is the other magician? There is another magician who they recorded. I think it was Fawcett Ross, but let me check briefly. Yeah, Fawcett Ross. So recordings from Fawcett Ross, Vernon. There might be other people who gave their take, which we get into later in the book, but most of it is from Vernon, with a little bit from Fawcett Ross. And some of the books that Malini was mentioned in, non-magic books, which I sort of had to write this out, but one is called Old Pinkham Days by J.B. Booth, and he's mentioned in chapters 1 and 9, so have a look out for that book. That's an old sort of gambling type book. It actually might be coming up on auction. I don't know if you guys know Potter and Potter. It's an auction house for magic and gambling related stuff. They're having an auction on gambling memorabilia, and I believe I saw this book on the auction block. So that might be coming up. I might try to grab a copy just for historical reference, because it is, I'm assuming, quite hard to find. That's Old Pinkham Days by J.B. Booth. There's another book that he's talked about and called Two Gun Cohen, and that's Cohen as in Steve Cohen, the same spelling, Cohen, Two Gun Cohen by Charles Drage, Drage. And that was a London, a guy who was raised in London, and he ended up going to China for some military operations. He became a Chinese general. I'm not too sure his whole background story, but he was in Shanghai with Malini, which is where Malini's mentioned in his book. What else do we have? There's a curious case of Eddie McGuire. Eddie McGuire was a part-time manager to Malini for a little time. Eddie McGuire is a really interesting guy. He was a good friend of T. Nelson Downs and also the legendary Walter Scott. And the way I know about Eddie McGuire, because Eddie McGuire is not really written much about in the old history books, but he is mentioned in a bunch of correspondence. And I remember at Conjuring Arts, one of the things we do is collect correspondence, and there were a lot of letters in between Eddie McGuire, T. Nelson Downs, and Eddie McGuire and other people. And you sort of got the background relation of Malini. He also wrote out Malini's show. That is not covered in the book. Eddie McGuire actually documented Malini's true show because he had seen it many times. Vernon writes out Malini's show. There's a lot of details missing. And Vernon also makes up his own methods and own versions of the tricks. It's hard for me to believe that Vernon saw Max Malini. And I don't think he saw most of magic. Maybe the guy met him on one occasion. I don't think he was really friends with him. He talks about hanging out with Malini a lot in this book, which I find hard to believe. So, Malini. Who was Malini? Before we get into who's Malini, on page 6, there's a mention of Eric de Lemaire, who was a magician. He published a lot of Malini's tricks, but with his own methods. He made up his own methods and published Malini's tricks. This was a very common trend in this book and in many other writings on Malini, because not a lot of magicians ever saw Malini. Malini didn't like other magicians, so he just wanted to spend time with them. He would not make himself available in that way to many magicians. He really was a private person, and he didn't want to associate with magicians. He wouldn't frequent magic shops. He wouldn't go to conventions. He was sort of on in his own bubble. He was a working magician. He was not a club magician. He was strictly a professional. Um, Malini gained entrance to the highest circles financially and socially. Several American presidents, several command performances for British royalty at Buckingham Palace. He's documented as performing for a lot of famous people and important people. Here's a short list of them that he used to advertise. Max Malini, the magician, has had the honor of appearing before the following notables. In the United States, the late President McKinley, the late President Harding, the late President Coolidge, President Roosevelt, John D. Rockefeller, J. Pierpont Morgan, Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt, John Jacob Astor, John J. Pershing, and many others. In Europe and foreign countries, King Edward VII of England, King George V of England, King George VI of England, the House of Peers in Japan, President Mikado in Cuba, President Ibanez in Chile, the King of Siam, Lord Derby, Duke of Portland. You will be thrilled and marveled as you watch this wonderful monarch of mystery. That's how he built himself. Malini was born in 1873 in Poland as Max Katz Bright, not to be confused with the Max Katz, who is Ricky Jay's grandfather. Different Max Katz, as far as I'm aware of, but they have the same name. I don't know. Is Ricky Jay Polish? Maybe Ricky Jay might be part Polish. I think Katz is a Polish name. But anyways, Malini, born in Poland as Max Katz in the year 1873. At the age of 12, he became an acrobat. At 15, he learned magic under Professor Sidon. I don't know who this guy, Professor Sidon, is, but I will be doing research on him. And from that age, Malini was working. He was working. He ran away basically to the circus to become an acrobat. He learned magic, and he would busk. He would just perform to make money. In his early 20s, he was a busker and saloon entertainer, and he was well known to perform under any condition. He'd walk into a joint, announce his arrival, and perform with whatever was in front of him. So that's the thing about Malini. Malini would walk into places, announce who he was, and start his performances, but he would never introduce props. Like he would never, bring a table with him or set up a stand with cards and coins and, cups and balls and other things. He would walk in, announce who he was, and he was a smart guy. He was sharp as he'd see what he could use in that room, whatever environment he was, and he'd use what was in the room to perform magic. So he might walk up to a bartender and produce a lemon from his ear, or he would also produce things that he would use later on, but he would produce them magically. So if he needed a lemon in a trick, he'd produce it. If the things that he needed to perform weren't already in the room, he wouldn't just produce it from his pocket. He wouldn't just reach in, oh, here, I have this, and produce it. He wasn't that type of guy. He was always working in advance, and making everything magical. As a young magician, his friends were Professor Walters. Professor Walters, I'm not too sure which Professor Walters this is referring to, so I'm going to look him up. And Emile Gero. For those of you guys who don't know, Emile Gero was a legendary magician. I believe he performed in vaudeville. Very well known for his beautiful sleight of hand, was very good friends with a lot of the good magicians of that time. Everybody knew that he was a great magician. Emile Gero. I don't know if there's any good books written about him, but I know that a lot of his material is published, oftentimes uncredited by Vernon. Vernon had a habit of publishing Emil Jarrow's material. He even publishes some of his material in this Malini book. And sometimes he would do it without crediting him. So just something to keep in mind as we go through. Malini also knew other magicians, but many of the magicians would over-exaggerate their connection to Malini, just because Malini was such a legendary guy. It's sort of like, David Copperfield today, or David Blaine, or Darren Brown. Somebody might come up to them after the show and ask for a photograph or something, and then they talk about that famous magician as if they're their best friend for the rest of their lives. This is what would happen a lot of times with Malini and different guys. People would over-exaggerate their connection. Somebody would meet them one time or have a conversation or a drink, and they would for the rest of their lives tell everybody that they were extremely close to them. During his middle 20s, he started privately entertaining within elite circles in America and Europe. So before then, he was working in the toughest bars, the saloons. He was a busker. He would work at the fairs, the carnivals, wherever he could get work. And that's how he became great at what he did. He learned how to perform in the worst places, which I think everybody who's good learns to do. I think you still can be good performing in hidey-tidy places, but there's something about being able to perform anywhere that just gives you an edge over other people. Malini would always say, you've got to mix with people with money if you ever want to make money. And he certainly did this in his life. There's a great photo here. I'm going to show it, actually. And it's of Malini in costume. And I hope you guys can see that. He sort of looked, and he was extremely short, extremely manly, but sort of effeminate in his dress sometimes. He would wear a giant cloak, and I don't know if you can see those stockings on his legs. So he would wear these short pants sometimes with these stockings and nice shoes. He was just a character. He would walk into the room, and everybody would recognize him as being someone special. He did not dress ordinary. He was always well dressed. He would always dress up very, very nicely. He always said, as long as I'm dressed nicely, I can always get work. That's how he thought. That's how he lived. He never knew when he was going to be out and doing magic, so he always was dressed and prepared. He always looked like a gentleman, so that when the opportunities arose, he could just perform, and he would look professional, and people would believe he was who he was. We have a physical description of him. He was extremely small, had short arms, very small hands. I believe his glove size was 5.5. And the way we know this is Edward Dern later in the book talks about supplying gloves while he was in Shanghai, I believe, with him to Malini. So that's how we know his glove size. He spoke. He spoke with great dignity, despite a deep guttural voice, a huge accent, and often distorted the English language. His speech is often written about and noted by people. He just had a really thick accent, and he would play on it. There are there are a lot of stories about his stories surrounding Malini. They became such tropes, like everybody sort of had 20 or 30 stories about Malini, and everybody knew them back in that time, that they're always rewriting the stories as if everybody knows them, but because nobody that's alive right now has been around at that time, a lot of the stories are just forgotten because nobody's told them, no one's recorded them, because they just assumed everybody knew these stories about Malini, which obviously was incorrect. His hands were apparently so small that he could not physically palm a card deceptively. That's what they say. His hands were so small he couldn't palm. So he had to use incredible misdirection. He was a master of delayed action, waiting to perform sleights. He would always perform surrounded. Nothing that he ever did was angle sensitive. Many people think, well, he has small hands. There's ways to cover that. With a table, with this, with that. Malini never used any of those things. From what I can surmise, I believe he worked really close to his body and he hid stuff in his hands and on his body by leaning, sitting, standing, and by his cloak and jacket. Apparently, he also vested a lot, which I'm not too sure if that's what he did. We don't have proof of that, but that's what Vernon believes. Take that at as you will. He would always wait until the time was right to make a move. He created psychological obstructions. And I think the only guy who we could really compare him to in terms of how he performed physically and psychologically is Danny D'Ortiz. Danny D'Ortiz is the only guy sort of like that who's active and can really do stuff right in front of you and make it seem invisible. And it's because he understands when you're tensed and when you're relaxed. And Malini was like that. He just knew how to make people laugh, how to make them relax, how to make them tense. He understood the emotions of the audience. He could control it. It was like he was playing a symphony um, every single time he performed. He received gifts from all the monarchs and royalty of Europe and Asia, and in many cases, he became their friends. He never really approached um, people as a stranger, as just a performer. He would always want to be their friend and be friendly and always treat himself as if he were this high class character. He would never lower himself. There's a great story here. And because he did that, people, by the way, would bestow gifts on him. The king of Siam gave him this ornament, which was just beautifully engraved with these diamonds. And they spelled out Malini one letter at a time. And you can see it in the old photos. He's wearing it with a ribbon around his neck. And it's just beautiful. When I want to recount this story in the book. When in London, Malini frequented Romano's and became extremely well known to the clientele. When it was known that he had been commanded to appear at Sandringham, which was a court by King Edward, on the occasion of Queen Alexandra's birthday, there was much good-natured leg pulling at Romano's bar, and Max received some alarming advice on the etiquette to be adopted in the royal presence. They told him, Max, whenever the king addresses you, remember, fall on your knees. On my knees, replied Malini. Good, good. I think I'll remember. Another sportsman said, don't forget to always address the king as your royal and sacred majesty. Royal and sacred majesty. Good. I'll remember it. And the third one said, keep walking backwards all the time. Always walk backwards. Don't turn your back to them. Just always walk backwards, face them, say your majesty, your majesty. The day after the command performance, his various advisors clustered around him at Romano's, eager to ply him with questions. Max forestalled them by saying with a chuckle, Ach, and you think I swallow all that foolishness? This is Max Malini. I know the royal etiquette business all right. You bet me. When the king come up to me and say, just like that, clever Very clever, Mr. Malini. Very clever indeed. I no fall on my knees or say royal and sacred majesty. No. I knows the etiquette. I say much obliged, royal mister. And the king laughed and he said, have a cigar. And I said, you bet. And we smoked the cigars. So, that's the kind of guy Malini was. He would always joke around with people. He didn't care who you were, if you were the king or whatever. He wouldn't just bow down. He would have a laugh with you and then, smoke a cigar. And that's just how he was. That was Max Malini. Malini, people would always ask him about his misdirection, and he would always tell them it's the eye, it's the eye, it's the eye. And I don't really know what he meant by that. Vernon and Charlie used to wonder, and they have a theory, and their theory is is that most people in magic will know that an audience will look in the direction that a performer looks. This is one meaning of Malini's phrase, but what I think he really meant was this. He had a very infectious way of talking, and when he addressed you with a sudden remark or spoke to you, it was almost impossible to keep from looking at him straight in the face. Naturally, when you caught his eye, you could not watch two things at the same time. Then his hands would make the secret maneuver. So, if I had to sum up in a few words the true secret of Malini's misdirection, I would say that he never made a quick move of any kind. He always did everything slowly. Many magicians make a quick move and try to deceive by quickness. Malini did everything slowly. In fact, if you happened to be looking at all right. Let me just make sure this is working. And this is working. I'm so sorry. We got cut off, and and I didn't realize that we got cut off. My internet had some problems. Somebody was playing with my computer, and we got cut off. So I was just speaking to myself for half an hour. Nothing was recorded. So a little bit frustrated by that, but what can you do? Made myself a coffee and going back at it. So sorry about that, guys. By the way, this is our first time doing this, so the technology is new for me. We will do a better job next time. I believe where I left off, I have to go back a bit, was Malini talking about Vernon and Charlie Miller talking about it's the eye, it's the eye. Malini's theory of misdirection. What I said was that it's impossible to misdirect people's eyes. When you can do it when you're performing for a small group of people or one person, you can see when their eyes move up and off the situation. But for most people, whenever you're performing, there's 30 people, 20 people that are surrounding you. No matter what joke you make, there's still people who are going to be looking at that deck, and they're going to be able to see your movements. And the way to get around this, and what I believe that Malini was doing, is he was doing something that Danny Ortiz does, which is he lets your eyes see what's happening, but your brain doesn't process it. And it's really interesting how this works. The only modern example that I can give today is Danny Ortiz. There's nobody else who's really mastered that technique of making things invisible in that way. Only Malini and Danny Ortiz today. I'm sure there's a lot of guys, but those guys are who I'm talking about. So I think that Vernon and Charlie Miller's theory is wrong, because you cannot get people to look up at you or away from the deck and make a move. in a real situation. You cannot. It's not a physical distraction. It's a psychological disarmament. Disarm. You're disarming them psychologically. They uh, they just lose focus. So they can stare at your hands, but they're not processing. We are watching things all around us when we go out. There's advertising, there's buses, there's cars, there's people, there's license plates, dozens and dozens of conversations. We are not processing this, or we are at least not focusing on it. And we're not seeing it, we're not hearing it. And that's okay because we become overloaded if we did that. But I believe that's what Malini is using. The same techniques that Dan Dertiz is using in his own style, but getting people's minds off of the the technique, the palm, the shift, whatever it is that he's making. All right. Malini died on October 3rd, 1942, in Honolulu, Hawaii. He was weak near the end of his life and performed sitting down for soldiers and sailors. 1942, we had World War II going on in the world, and there were a lot of soldiers stationed in Hawaii, and that's where Malini died. And it's quite significant, I think, that Malini spent the last part of his life in Hawaii because that's where he first made his success. That's where he sort of first built his name up, his career in Hawaii. Hawaii back at that time was ruled by a king and a queen. I think it was still part of the U.S., but it still had its own king and queen. And he became very familiar with them and performed for them and became friends with them. And that's sort of where he had his first success and made it in Hawaii. So that's where he died. I believe his son was with him when he died, but I'm not sure. Going into Malini's full evening show, he would perform this in a hotel, and his modus operandi of performing the show was very simple but very clever. He wouldn't pay for things the way most people would pay for stuff. So here's what he would do: he'd spend his time at the hotel. I don't know, a week or 2 weeks, a month. He was making a lot of money. Malini was making the equivalent. It's hard to calculate because the money is always off, but he was making around $30,000 to $40,000 a month performing magic, and he had no fixed home as far as I'm aware of. So he was always on the move, always getting engagements. He loved to live a high profile life. And even if he didn't have money, he would stay in the finest places and make connections with people, and they would pay the bill for him. They would be happy to. And no matter where he was, he would always make people pay to see the show. It doesn't matter if somebody invited Malini to stay at his house for 6 months. Malini would go stay at his house, but at the end he'd say, I'm doing a little show and I'm selling tickets. I know you're going to come, but here I have. How many tickets do you want? How many tickets do you want? You want 10 tickets, 12 tickets? This is how many the tickets are. I'll let you buy them all off me, and then you can resell them to your friends. And he was so persuasive that even if they were paying everything for him, they'd buy tickets from him. And he'd do this to everybody. So he would make maybe 4 or 5 times the amount from a show just because he would sell tickets. And then when the people would want to give tickets to their friends had already bought 10 tickets themselves. And so they would, and it was just genius because most of these people would not resell their tickets to their friends. Some would just buy it and be like, whatever. Most of these people had a lot of money, and they didn't want to seem cheap, so they didn't want to resell. And they didn't want to let Malini down because, oh, he's such a good guy, hangs out at the bar, does this. They buy the tickets. They come see the show. And let me just say, this might seem like a like a hustle or a fraudulent technique, and it's not. Malini really was worth every penny, and even if they bought 20 tickets or 50 tickets, they were paying to see something that they could never ever see ever again in their life. It was truly a master at work, and the show was worth every penny. I myself would give every single dollar I have in the world right now to see Mulaney perform. That's how good he was. He would decorate the theater. Oh, by the way, let me talk about how he would set up the shows. So he'd set up the shows like this. He'd go to a nice hotel, stay there for a while, work the private clubs, work the private parties, make friends with everybody in the hotel, the people who are staying there on vacation, the management, this, that, everyone. And then he'd tell them, I can do a little show. He'd do magic in the bar. Oh, yeah, yeah. I can do a little show here. He'd talk it up to the management, and the management would say yes, and they work out a business deal. And Malini would guide this. He would say, here's what we do. We have a dinner, a nice fancy dinner by the hotel. Then I do my show, and then we have a dance, and then I perform my close-up magic for the rest of the evening. This way, it was a good deal for the hotel. They would be making money. They'd be making money off the dinner. They'd be making money off the dance. He would do his show, make his money on the show, and they'd advertise it all together. This hotel is having this fancy. This fancy hotel is having this fancy evening, and this is the entertainment. And that way, he could save money on everything. He didn't have to hire his own musicians to do music for his show. He didn't have to hire people to work the door. The hotel would hire them. He was really clever at making the hotel pay and selling his own tickets to do for his own event. Really genius. I mean, it was a co-event, but he controlled the parts that had to do with money. His money. He wasn't a thief. He wasn't a scammer. I mean, he just wanted to get paid. It's a tough life in the show business industry, and he just wanted to make sure he got paid. Many times he would not pay for different services. For example, he didn't have to decorate the room because it was done in a hotel. He would have the room and the little screened off partition where he would change during the intermissions, and it was beautifully decorated with potted plants and flowers and all sorts of stuff. And the way he would decorate it, he wouldn't pay for it. He'd call a florist up, a person who sells flowers, and he would start talking to them. Yeah, I'm doing a show. He'd perform magic, and he'd tell stories about how he performed for this king and how he's famous in this country and did this. And the people were so enthralled with Malini that they would just want to be part of his story, and they would just offer him things. They would pay. They would just give him flowers. They would give him the potted plants, but they let him borrow it. He didn't want to keep it. He just wanted to do a show, and they wanted to be part of the show. And that's who he was. And it was sort of like a genius thing because he was just getting people involved. He wanted to do these amazing magic shows and the upper echelons of society, and he could never do it himself because it costs so much money. So he would get people involved, and by letting them feel involved, he was able to do his shows at the highest level places and get the most amount of money, but also, have different people involved in it. Just really, really interesting. I don't think there's anybody who does that these days. Everything's with lawyers and contracts and a bunch of nonsense. Malini was he was a man of his word. He would say something and it would happen. And that's how things used to be back in those days. People would say things and their words had value. They wouldn't just speak nonsense. So he'd start his show dressed in a beautiful white costume. He would introduce himself and say that he used no apparatus or paraphernalia whatsoever and no assistance. His performing area, which was a little platform raised a few feet from the floor, had a table on it with two tumblers, two silver table knives, and 6 decks of cards. And he'd open the show with the silk vanish. He'd walk out with a piece of silk, put it inside of a tube, a little lamp glass, and he'd make the silk vanish. Then he would he'd do a color change with it. So he'd reproduce that silk, make it appear, and uh, turn it into an American flag. After that, he would request a cigarette be loaned to him. He would borrow that cigarette and then multiply it into 2 cigarettes. And then he'd put the 2 cigarettes down on a table, put his hands on top of them, and they would stick to his hands as if they were magnetic. He'd walk out into the audience, hold his hands apart, and explain what was happening, build up that tension. And then he got someone from the audience. And when they said the word go, the cigarettes dropped and he got thunderous applause. He would then repeat the feat with the 2 silver knives, also proving that his hands were magnetic, making those knives stick to his fingertips, making them levitate. Not a levitation, more of a magnetic body. And the way Vernon describes how this was done, I'm not going to talk about all the methods. I mean, if we talk about the silk vanish, Vernon gives like a more complicated setup. I have to read. This is a version of the show from Vernon. It's worth talking about and going into, but the methods just are not here in the book. And also, I don't know if Malini actually, Vernon actually saw Malini performing it. So it's hard to say, what this is worth. It's interesting, but I don't know if it's real. To really get the real sense of Malini's show, you have to read Eddie McGuire's write-up of it, which I don't know if it's published. I've seen it, I've read it, but it's quite interesting. It's quite different. Similar but different. I wouldn't be surprised if Vernon based his book a lot on Eddie McGuire's description of the show. I don't even know if Vernon saw the show, to be honest. And the reason I say that is Vernon never had money, and he, it's complicated. But I have a theory about Vernon. But Vernon says he gives an explanation, which I don't think is. He admits is not correct. He said this is how you would do it if you want to walk around the stage with the silk and then make it vanish. Then for the cigars, he gives some explanation that it stuck because it was moist. His fingers were moist, so it would stick. I don't know if that's true. I just we're gonna skip through those explanations. He did penetration and vanish of a tumbler, so he did the classic penetration of a cup that you see in the cups and balls. When magicians hold up one cup, they bang them together to show that they're solid, but then show that they can also pass through each other by dropping one cup through another cup. So he would do that with a tumbler, a little glass, like a little sort of shot glass. He would then apparently toss the glass into the air, vanishing it in full view. Then he would do the card work that he was known for on the show. He'd have, as I said before, 6 decks of cards on the table. He'd bring 6 gentlemen up. They'd each open a brand new pack of cards, shuffle it. He'd have Malini would have each of them take a card and put it inside their pocket without looking at it. They'd take a card, put it inside their pocket. And he'd tell stories about his travels around the world. And everybody always asked me, Malini, you've been everywhere in the world. You've talked to everybody. You know everything. What is the one thing that people have in common all over the world? And Malini would say the only thing that people have in common all over the world is man's love for women. Allow me to demonstrate the truth of this statement. I'm going to ask the 6 gentlemen here on the platform to remove their cards from their pockets and show you what cards were actually selected. And each man would reach inside his pocket, pull out a card, and it was the Queen of Hearts. All 6 of them had chosen the same card. Really a strong effect and a great starting effect. Really strong, really, Danny Ortiz does a similar thing at the beginning of his shows sometimes. Very different. He has a card on the table, and he goes into the audience. He riffles. You see a card. You see a card. You see a card. You think of a card. Blah blah blah. Does it to many people. What card did you see? The what? The Queen of Hearts. And what did you see? Also the Queen of Hearts. And you? No. The Queen? And you? Okay, the Queen. Everybody saw the Queen of Hearts? This is very interesting because there's no Queen of Hearts inside the deck. There's no Queen of Hearts inside the deck. Because before the show began, we left a card on the table. The card on the table is exactly the missing card from the deck. The card you all saw but it's not here because it was never here. It's always been on the table. And then it shows the card. It's on the table. It's amazing. Malini would do other card magic. One of the tricks he would do was very similar to a piece by Babel, and that he would have cards selected. They would dematerialize with the color change. They'd come back. Yes, Malini did force the card 6 times during the show, and I'll talk about the method for how he did that. So what Malini would do is it was a brand new deck of cards, so he'd have them all shuffle the deck, and then he'd say, we got to get rid of the jokers from the pack and the ad cards and all this. So after they would shuffle the deck, he would pick up their deck, and they'd all be trying to get the jokers and the ad cards right. He was so fast, he could remove it, boom. And as he was removing the cards, he would slip that Queen of Hearts to the top of the pack and then leave it on the table, go to the next pack, help the next guy, go to the next pack, help the next guy. This happened really fast, and people say, how can you do that with 6 decks? You can do it with 6 decks. I mean, you can see guys like Danny Ortiz doing very similar stuff, Leonard Green. It's just a matter of being funny and, entertaining people. Obviously, if you're just sitting there and you're being boring, all right, let's take the ad cards from this deck. And then you're making it into a process, then it's boring. But that's apparently the method he would use. It's also possible that he just had it gimmicked. It's very possible that he just had all the cards as short cards in the deck, and so that he could actually have them open the deck, shuffle it, and then locate it and force it on them. But yes, he would force it on the 6 men. But the method that Vernon gives is the method with the jokers and the ad cards. But knowing Malini, he could just have easily have gaffed it and made it much simpler for himself. But who knows? It's kind of impossible to tell. It actually might not be impossible to tell. So there's a deck of cards that Malini used to do card magic, and I believe he did the card stab, which is in a show I'm about to talk about. And that's what he would use to finish the show. So maybe that deck has evidence of any special things he did to it. That deck right now is in the Magic Circle Museum. I have seen it. I have not investigated it because I didn't go there to investigate it. But maybe the next time I'm down there, I will make an appointment to see the deck and to really look at it and to see if there's anything special. It's a very old deck of cards, so it's very fragile, and they're very protective of it because it's a piece of Magic history. But it may contain secrets. It's unknown. Or it might not. There's some people whose decks contain secrets. Rene Levant's decks had short cards and different things in it, and Malini may have used things as well, but we don't know, or at least I don't know. Maybe someone out there knows, but I don't know. We'll see. So he'd do a bit of card magic after that first trick. He'd do the ambitious card. Always very simple versions of everything. He'd make cards disappear, reappear in people's pockets. I believe he's sort of just jazzed with his close-up bar material on stage for cards mostly, except for that the six gentleman trick with the Queen of Hearts. And then and then he would close the first part of the show with his blindfolded card stabbing. So, let me go into this. So the blindfolded card stab is a very simple plot. The magician is blindfolded. There's cards spread on the table. Cards have been selected. Cards have been lost. The magician gets a knife, stabs it into the table, finds the cards. Really powerful piece. Let me go through this description and then talk about it. So apparently, the way Vernon describes Malini doing it is he had 8 to 10 cards selected. The cards would be lost into the deck shuffled, deck put on the table. Malini then borrows handkerchiefs from people in the audience. He allows them to blindfold him with 2 handkerchiefs over his eyes. Then he picks up the knife, mixes the cards on the table with the knife as like a little spatula. Turns to the first gentleman with the knife. Obviously, Malini's blindfolded. You name your card. Stabs into the table. Comes up. It's that guy's card. Gets applause. You name your card. Second guy does it. Again, applause. Third guy, again, applause. All the way until the last card. Malini mixes it again. Stabs into the table. Now this time, he lifts up the table by a leg, shakes it. All the cards fall on the floor except for one card that's stuck to that knife that's stuck into the table. Malini then stands up, pulls off the blindfold. And what was the name of your card? Right now, there's one card on the table. It's stabbed with this here knife. I found your card, your card, your card, your card, and your card. I have no more chances. There's no more cards. If this is your card, I don't know exactly what he would say, but he'd build it up and he'd pull that knife out, and it was a miracle. Get huge, huge applause. Finally, he had the handkerchiefs still in his hand. He'd say, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to close the first part of the show, but before we close the first part of the show, still have a problem. Whose handkerchiefs are these? Yours and yours. Ah, they still have these knots in them. Look." And he'd take the handkerchiefs and he'd rub his hands over the knots, and the knots would magically dissolve, and he'd give this person back their handkerchief. and this person back their handkerchief. And that was the end of the first part of the show. And it's just a genius thing in structuring, just that last part with the handkerchief. So beautiful. It's a classic thing in magic, doing magic with knots. Um, and uh, but instead of always borrowing stuff, using what is the conditions for one trick and then immediately going into another trick with it. It's just genius structuring. About the blindfold card stab. Uh, First of all, Vernon says that Malini borrowed a penknife. I don't believe this one bit. I have experimented myself, and I've been with people who have experimented. For example, Paul Vigil played with this piece. He performed this piece at Magic Live um, in Las Vegas. They were having a week on the Stars of Magic, and he wanted to do this piece for that convention. So he started working at it, and I was at his house when he was working at it. And you cannot just pick up a borrowed knife and stab a card. It might not have the right tip. It might not stay. There's a lot of knives that will penetrate the card. You stab into it, it'll make a hole in the card, but when you lift the knife up, the card will not stick. So it's very highly doubtful to me that Malini would borrow a knife, not knowing if it would work or not. It doesn't make sense to me. And it's so difficult to do. Paul Vigil actually ended up putting tape on the knife, just this clear little double-sided tape, just to make it a little easier. You couldn't see it, but he was having such problems getting those cards to stick to the knife when he was lifting it up that he put tape on it. So it's very highly doubtful that you can just pick up a borrowed knife and do this trick. You need to have the right type of knife. There are the knives that do work with this, and it's all just experimentation. I can't really give you a guideline on how to do it, uh, but it does work. Da, da, da. Okay, that finished the. Did I want to say anything else about the knife? Card stab? I don't know. Very powerful routine, something that I want to work on, card stab. I bought a knife for it. It's a really great routine. Nobody does it these days. That's the thing about magic. Like nobody does good magic these days. Everybody just wants to do new stuff. They forget about all the good stuff that's in print. So there'd be an intermission after the card stab. Lasted about 5 minutes. The music would be playing. There were musicians in the room. Malini would come out for the second part. He was wearing all black, black knickers, black stockings, a black cloak, and so forth. An entire change of costume from his previous suit of white. Then he would open up and do the egg bag. He started with the egg bag, and apparently he would do it differently than anybody. It's not too clear to me how he would do it because it's not written about in the book. It just says that he did it differently, but then the description that Vernon gives is that he would tell a story about how magicians did it all around the world, and he basically gives a basic description of the classic egg bag routine. Not really different than what he first suggested. Uh, I've never been a huge fan of the egg bag. I think it's sort of a silly plot in magic. I don't really I don't really care for it. I think if it had some sort of meaning or symbolism, like if you explained that the the egg is very fragile. This is why we use the egg. So if I hide it, it'll break. So I can't do any sneaking moves with it. And this is a simple silk bag. This is made by a piece of cloth. Blah blah blah. It's magical. Anything that goes inside transforms or disappears or becomes smaller. If you had some sort of like black hole type explanation like that, I think it would be a cool plot. But the egg bag is itself, I don't understand it today. I don't understand how they could have performed it back then. The only thing I do understand is that Malini did it differently than other magicians, because the way I usually see it, even when it's done well, it's a bad trick. It's just not strong. He did the cut and restored ribbon. He would only do this once. He hated rope routines that had multiple phases, that had people um, pulling, you know, pulling the rope longer, making it shorter, making it cut and restored and cut over and over again. He just did things once. He wanted it to be strong. He wanted it to just be a one-time thing. Um, he did a coin game. So this was a very simple game where he borrowed a quarter, a half dollar, and a handkerchief. His hand was wrapped with a handkerchief with the one of the coins sticking out, and it was a game. A boy had to try to grab the coin faster than Malini could close his hand. And if he did, he won a prize or something. Or he had to slap. He had to slap the quarter. I don't know exactly what the point of the game was. I've never seen it. All I know is this is sort of like an old con game, and they describe it in the book. Ricky Jay was really interested in it. He wanted to use it for a show, or so I'm told. So was David Roth very interested in it. They did a lot of research on it, but Malini did it differently than most people by having his hand wrapped with the handkerchief. Next, by the way, he would only do this if there were boys in the audience, if there were little children, because it really is more of a game, and it is funner with kids. Next, he would do the bills, lemon, and egg. He would have a $5 and $10 bill borrowed, wrapped in separate handkerchiefs. The two boys previously mentioned would select an egg from a bowl of eggs. Then a lemon was magically produced from the nose of the other boy and held in full view. The bills were vanished from the handkerchiefs. The lemon was cut open, and the $5 bill found inside. The egg was then broken up with a wand. The $10 bill found inside. This sounds like a very simple effect, but in Malini's hands, it produced a complete illusion. In fact, on occasions, it was almost as effective as his famous card stabbing trick. This usually concluded the second part of his program. Sometimes he would add his famous button trick. So the button trick, talk about the bills, lemon, and egg in a moment. But the button trick. I don't know if Malini did this in the show. I think this was a bit that he would do. I don't think it was a formal piece. So it's sort of weird that Vernon writes about it here, because it was never really used as a formal set piece. It was just an impromptu thing. But the trick is Malini would walk up to a gentleman, and gentleman who's using it as an assistant, he said, "Look, you have this button here that's loose on your coat. Let me help you with that." And he grabbed the guy's coat, and he just bite the fabric and pull the button off. And then he'd have the button in between his teeth and would show everybody that he ripped it off with his teeth. And then he'd bring the button with his mouth closer to the jacket. He'd rub a little bit, rub, and the button would magically be back onto the jacket. Again, this is an impromptu piece. I don't think it was in his formal show. He may have done it in his show at different moments. I just highly doubt that it was presented after the bill, lemons, and eggs. It doesn't make sense to me personally. So another intermission, and now he does part 3 of the show. The intermission is 5 minutes long. And let me just look at my notes here. He comes out dressed in Chinese robe with like a Chinese tune playing. He produces bowls of water, and he one of the water bowls weighs about 50 pounds. They say that 50 pounds. This is what they say. I don't know if I believe this. Producing a water bowl, 50 pounds. This is a classic trick. You can see it in movies. You can see it, for example, I believe in the maybe The Prestige or The Illusionist. They sort of show a part of it in one of the scenes in the movie. It's a classic trick. A guy comes out in an oriental robe, and he magically produces a giant bowl of water. I doubt it was 20 liters. 20 liters, I don't know if you guys have ever seen a 20-liter bucket. It is huge, and it is very heavy. And also, water is very, very hard to move. It's not only hard to move with, but it's hard to move without making noise. So I don't know how much water was in the actual bowl, but it's kind of, I don't know. I'm not going to comment on it. I have to do more research, but I highly doubt it was 50 liters. 50 pounds, not 50 liters, 50 pounds. Then he would close his show. By the way, this is missing so much magic. What, part 3, he just produced 2 bowls of water and did the end of the show? No, it's impossible. This is not what's written from Eddie McGuire. Anyways, Malini showed 5 glass tumblers and placed them in position on the table. Oh, this is interesting. Where did those 5 glass tumblers come from? There was no tray also, at least in Vernon's description of the show. So where did all this material come from? I'll just read this because it's complicated. A tray which was about 1.5 inches deep was placed on top of the tumblers. 5 tubes were made by rolling up playing cards, and these were placed on the tray, each cardboard tube being directly above a tumbler beneath the tray. Finally, 5 raw eggs were balanced on the tube. Glasses, trays, and eggs were left standing in position on the table while a deck of cards was picked up. Malini would then quickly perform a few fancy shuffles and flourishes, and then he would demonstrate his skill at card throwing. Then, with a dramatic cry of "Look!" he suddenly gave the tray a quick blow. The tray and holders fell to the floor, and all 5 eggs dropped safely into the 5 glass tumblers. This concluded Max Malini's full evening performance. All right, so there is that. I don't really know what to make of that as an ending of a show. If we're to believe this, Malini ended his show not with a magic effect, but with a demonstration of skill by doing card flourishes, by doing different cuts and shuffles, throwing cards, and then doing another, dexterity-based piece, which they call the inertia trick, where he hits that tray out and the eggs fall into those tumblers. I don't really know what to make of that. I don't know what the effect was. I've never seen it done, so I don't know what the performance was like. But if he chose to end his show on it, it must have been pretty powerful. Yeah, he closed the show with pretty much cardistry. According to Vernon, I don't know though. I have to look into secondary sources because I don't remember. I've read a lot of stuff, but I don't remember all the stuff off the top of my head. I gotta make another coffee soon. Uh, all right, now let's talk about Malini's methods, which is very interesting. Give me one moment here. All right, sorry about that. People always want to talk to me. Uh, I'm just that kind of guy. Uh, okay, Malini's methods. Here we go. Malini worked very slowly. He told a lot of stories and anecdotes while he was performing. This is very well recorded. Malini was one of the great storytellers, and he had a lot of stories to tell. He's been all over the world. He performed for all these the most famous and powerful people in the world. He was well known by the power establishment of his day. He was one of them in a way, although he wasn't one of them. I don't know. It's hard to explain. um, let's talk about the methods. Most of these methods are fake, or they're just he gives other message. Like for example, the silk vanish. Okay, Vernon says Malini used the familiar pull. His pull was simply a strap fastening to his left arm with a cord attached, which passes across his shoulders and down his right sleeve, terminating in a catgut loop. Makes no sense. He has, first of all, Vernon has no proof for any of this. He didn't really know Malini, so I don't know how he could be describing his pull. So I'm just gonna skip. I'm gonna skip the stuff that I just don't think is real because it's not even worth talking about. And then he goes up into like how to design a more elaborate pull. So if you want to design this to work in the middle of the show instead of the beginning of the show, I mean, most of this is Vernon just describing tricks and then tricks that he never saw, and then describing how he would do it or how one of his friends would do it. Kind of shady. Like he gives this whole explanation with drawings and drawings of this pole that's not used by Malini, and he admits it's not used by Malini, and probably he never even used it himself. I just don't. I mean, I don't know. Anyways, color change. Da, da, da. I'm just gonna skip through until I see something interesting. Uh, yeah, some of the stuff I can't even comment on. Even how he describes Malini vanishing the tumbler. Apparently Malini's just holding the tumbler and he throws it up like this, and his hand is covering it, and it's in his palm, and nobody seems to see it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. This is probably I highly doubt that's how Malini did it. Malini also had very small hands. I mean, he wouldn't be able to hide stuff like that. At least from my point of view, it's possible. But why would Vernon try to figure out Malini's show and then publish a book about it? So Malini was very well known. Everybody knew that he was a legendary magician, and it's sort of like as I said earlier, what happens to guys like David Copperfield and Darren Brown and David Blaine. They're very famous, they're very well known, and they're very good at what they do. And everybody wants to associate with them. So, you might have a guy who meets one of these magicians for like 5 minutes, or maybe they have a drink with them, or they're in the same restaurant. And then they tell people for the rest of their lives that they're friends. Vernon took this to a whole other level, and he pretended like he was Max Malini's best friend, when in reality he didn't know him. And yeah, why would he write a book about Malini and try to publish methods. Why wouldn't he write Malini's life story? And the truth is, you can see it in the book. The whole book tells you why it's been written. It's because he doesn't actually know Malini's story. He doesn't actually really know Malini on any significant level. So he's just left with stories of Malini's tricks, and he pretends that he knew him and that he knows how Malini performed his magic, which is, just it's just not accurate. There's a lot of people who have covered up this fact throughout the year, and unfortunately, they've been friends with either Vernon or they've been students of Vernon, so they feel like they have to protect him, even though they know the truth about him and Malini. They're like in denial. It's sort of a weird thing going on. Can't really talk too much about it here, but so Vernon describes and he tries to explain the card stabbing, which is pretty interesting. How did I get here? Card magic. Page 24. Yeah. The method that Vernon gives for the card stabbing doesn't really sound real to me. I mean, it doesn't sound deceptive. So basically, from Vernon's point of view, when the cards were being lost and replaced in the deck, Malini was controlling them all to the bottom of the deck together, and then he would just spread out the deck and move the cards. And he would cut the deck into 3 piles, spread the 3 piles out, and then mix only these 2 piles over here together while leaving this pile. And then with a knife, he would, stab into that pile that hasn't been untouched to grab one of the selected cards. It doesn't really make sense to me. I think everybody would see this. Like if you make 3 piles of cards on a table and then you only mix 2 together, there's 1 pile that's untouched, virtually untouched. I think the audience is going to see that. So I don't think that's how Malini did it. I think there's many ways that Malini could have performed this trick, controlling cards to different positions. For example, to the top, or keeping them at the bottom. It's hard to say though, unless you've experimented with doing a wash on a table. The possibilities. It's also possible that Malini was holding out, and he was just releasing a card every single time he wanted to stab it. Release a card, stab, pick up, while he continues to wash, stab, pick up. It's possible, but it's not clear. I just don't believe this explanation of the card stab, personally. Page am I on over here? The egg bag. So here's some cool notes on the egg bag. Malini never bangs or hits the egg bag. He's always very gentle with it and handles it with great importance. You often see people handling the egg bag really oddly. It's like they want to prove that it's empty, so they're like slapping it and squeezing it and doing all sorts of stuff. But there's no really natural way to hit or slap a bag. Like if you have a little velvet bag and you're like slapping it to show that it's empty, it just doesn't look right. It doesn't, like, theatrically, it's horrible. And I've seen it on stage many times. I won't name any names of magicians, but it just looks horrible. And Malini never did that. He never banged the bag on a table. He never slapped it. He never squeezed it. He. And here's another thing. He never put the egg inside the bag. Malini never put the egg inside the bag. He would drop it into the bag. So he'd open the bag with one hand, and then he'd drop it inside, just so you could have that clean visual of it dropping. And so you know that he wasn't putting his hand, like he wasn't making his hand go in the bag, dropping it, and then secretly stealing it out with his hand. He'd always drop it from the air, so you knew 100% the egg was going inside that bag. Just a small little note, very interesting. There is a weird note here on page 33. There is an extremely weird note. And I don't know how to take this. He's still talking about the egg bag. I'm just going to read it. He says, the vanish of the egg, which he used for the climax, was the simplest possible thing. But it is one of those really great illusions that can be created and acted on. It is a question of following Houdini's instructions that a magician must be an actor, and Malini acted this out brilliantly. Now, Houdini never said that a magician must be an actor. What probably happened, at least not that I'm aware of, I believe that's from a quote from Robert Houdin. Houdin said, the magician is an actor playing the part of the magician. So I think that's sort of where they got that jumbled up. So maybe Vernon said when on the recording, Houdin's name, and then it came out as Houdini's. But again, it's a big error in the book. Houdini and Houdin are two different guys, obviously. What else do we have here? Okay, let's talk about the bill, the lemon, and the egg. So this is a trick that was probably originated by Emile Gero, who we talked about earlier. It's not certain, but it was a very popular trick at that time to find stuff inside of eggs, inside of lemons, inside of oranges, inside of walnuts. But they think it originated with Gero, so it's possible. I don't know though. Vernon claims that Malini had a hollowed out lemon inside of his pocket, and that he would shove the bill inside. He would load it inside, and so he could load a lot. He could load the signed bill inside the lemon. No, it doesn't. It doesn't make sense to me because later on he. So let me. This is so hard to explain because there's three narratives here. There's Vernon's narrative, which is him describing a trick, and then Vernon's describing the trick and a method which he would use, but it's not the method that Malini would use. And then there's a real, I think, what really happened. So I'll sort of go through it. Vernon describes Malini stealing the bills away before they vanish from the handkerchief. I won't go into the technical details of that. And then he has a lemon with a hole in his pocket. So the lemon has a hole in it. He's able to roll up that bill, put it inside that hole inside the lemon, and then somehow produce the lemon from his pocket, and later on cut it open and show that there's the signed bill inside. And then he also, apparently, according to Vernon, has a special gimmick little magic wand that you can put a bill inside, a rolled up bill. And apparently he asked the spectator, grab any one of the eggs, hold it up, and then Malini hits the egg with his wand, breaks the egg with his wand. And as he's breaking it with his wand, the bill shoots into the egg, and then Malini goes to unroll the bill inside the egg, and as he's unrolling it, he switches it for the bill that he had secretly rolled, and then hands it to the guy. Basically, it makes no sense. I mean, if you actually read, if you try to do the stuff in the book, it's kind of retarded. It doesn't work. Like, why would you ask a spectator to hold an egg and then smash it with a wand while the spectator's holding the egg in their hand? And you'd get egg all over them. Whatever they're holding would fall on the floor. It would be a huge mess. They wouldn't be able to find the bill. It would be a disaster. And how would you would then what? You'd go through. You would load the egg as you're smashing it, and then go through and switch the bill. Yeah, doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. I'm not going to waste any more time on that. Makes no sense. I am thinking. Yeah, I can't even talk about it. It's so nonsensical. I mean, if he actually smashed an egg inside their he actually smashed the egg inside their hand, why would Malini then go and pick up the bill and then switch it and then give it to them to unroll? Their hands are already messy. Why would he use a gimmick wand to get that inside? And then it doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. I mean, I have a hard time reading this book sometimes. Where are we here? 36. One of the things, when Malini asked, so Malini would ask, "Oh, does anybody have a lemon?" Obviously, no one in the room would have a lemon, and he'd point to something. And he'd say, "Oh, you don't have a lemon." And be like, "No." And he'd say, "Why are you lying?" And he'd reach into their pocket and produce a lemon from them. Just another thing of always using every situation, instead of just introducing objects and carrying them on stage in a basket or a bowl or on a table. You can produce stuff in the show magically and then use it later on. Also, for me, it's very doubtful that Malini used the card, egg, and wand gimmick. I don't know of any other references of him using a wand in his magic. So it just seems very silly to me that he would randomly pull out this wand and use it in this trick. Like, the whole thing doesn't make sense. Okay. Page 37, more bragging from Vernon. Is basically Vernon talking about how he's hanging out with Leipzig and Manuel, who was another great coin manipulator, and he was with various distinguished people, including several newspaper editors, and it's all about how Vernon was impressing them, and it's interesting, to say the least. But Leipzig and Manuel were impressing them too, but it's just like, it doesn't even make sense. All right. The button trick. Malini performed the button trick, usually impromptu. He'd perform it in the streets and in the bars. He once performed the button trick for President Harding in 1922. And when he did this, it made all the front page of the newspapers in Washington. So Malini knew how to come into a town and really introduce himself, make a name for himself. He was always doing stuff to build up his legend. He wanted everybody to know his name, even if they didn't know his magic. And he was just generally a very funny guy. If he was performing magic for a group of people and somebody walked into the door, he would ask somebody, "What's that guy's name?" And they would tell him, "Oh, that's this guy." And so he'd call him over. You're this person, and the person would say, "Oh, excuse me, do I know who you are?" And he says, "No, you don't know who I am. You're the only person in this whole city who doesn't know who I am. I'm the great Max Malini." Then he would start performing magic. Um, let's see what else. All right, page 40. They're talking about the Chinese part of his show where he produces water and stuff. Here's the quote from Vernon. Such an insult. It's like a slap in the face. It says, "To be frank, the production of the bowl and the cylinder was never too skillfully performed. Malini himself realized this, but on the other hand, it produced color and flash, so he inevitably included it in his full evening show." Malini was not a guy to do stuff for flash or color. Most of his magic is very plain, very simple, very low key, very strong and direct. I don't believe that Malini would do something if he couldn't do it properly. So, I mean, it is possible that he. I guess technically it's possible that he didn't do the production well. It just doesn't make sense. It's not in keeping with his character. Why would he have an amazing show all around and then do one thing in the show that was garbage and then know it was garbage but then still do it? It doesn't make sense to me. Here we have Malini at the bar. By the way, for the inertia trick, Vernon gives a simplified method of accomplishing the inertia feat, but admits Malini did the real thing. Sorry, guys, I'm still a little bit sick. Malini would get important work and connections from performing in upscale bars. He would go to bars in nice hotels and nice parts of towns and just perform magic, and he rarely paid for anything. People would offer to buy him drinks and just want to be his friend. He was sort of just a legendary guy, and people followed suit with that. They wanted to treat him well. There was, I don't know if it's still there, but at the Waldorf Astoria in New York, there was a large moving stone which was produced by Malini, and they had the words inscribed in it saying, "This stone was produced magically by Max Malini." So that was in 1921. I don't know if it's still there. I haven't seen it. I know that Steve Cohen used to do a show there, so I'll probably ask him the next time I talk to him if that stone is still there, but it may be gone because it's been almost 100 years and they've done a lot of renovations to the Waldorf Astoria in the last 100 years. It may not even be the same location, to be honest. I'm not sure. All the old-time bartenders throughout the world knew and had seen Malini perform. They all had stories about him. So any city that you went to, if you asked the bartenders of really nice bars and restaurants and hotels if they knew about Malini, they all knew Malini personally. Which again just shows you, Vernon saying that Malini only performed for money is just not false. He was a guy who loved to perform magic. He would perform magic every single day of his life for pretty much everyone. He wouldn't perform professionally for them. I mean, he wouldn't give them a full show. He'd do a trick or two. But, I mean, he wouldn't make them pay. Malini was like Uri Geller. He was taking advantage of situations and coincidences. He would never introduce props and begin a performance. He would always wait until somebody held something he could use, or was asked to perform, he never walked up to somebody and performed magic for them. Many times when people would ask him to perform magic, he would just ignore them and then perform later. He never was like he never was like a like a dance monkey type of guy. He if somebody asked him to do tricks, he would just say, "Oh, we'll have a drink, we'll have a drink," and he would have two, three drinks and tell stories and give them a good time. But he would never cave into that type of pressure. He wasn't that type of guy. There's a story here on page 43 going into page 44 about Malini doing a coin vanish. He would have a gold coin, really beautiful coin, and he would do a vanish using the well-known cold coin, uh, cold coin fold from C. Lang Neil's The Modern Conjurer, which is just a way of folding the paper with a coin inside so that you can rip it up and the coin is vanished. And they used to have something, so he'd do the vanish only having the paper, then he'd throw the paper into what they call a cuspidor. And apparently he would have the coin also in there, and he'd throw it in the cuspidor as well. And for the longest time, I had no idea what a cuspidor was, and like how could they not see it? That he's just throwing the coin down there. I thought it was like a grate in the floor or something. What a cuspidor is it's the size of a vase. It's like a little vase, and they used to put it on the floor of restaurants and bars and hotels and pretty much everywhere because people would chew a lot of tobacco and smoke a lot inside. So people would like spit into these bowls. These were disgusting bowls filled with spit. And apparently Malini would make the coin vanish, throw these pieces of paper in there like it was nothing. And as he was throwing it, these things were filled with spit, probably like this much deep with spit. He'd throw the gold coin inside, and no one could see it because it would go with the paper. No one would think like, no one would ever imagine that he's, getting rid of a gold coin in there, just because of how disgusting it is. And then Malini would continue to tell stories and perform. And then when he would see that one of the waiters or the janitor was coming to clean out the cuspidor, because what they would do is they would every few hours, or I don't know how often, because you don't see them anymore. Every so often, people would come to collect the cuspidors and wash them out. And Malini would keep track of when the person was coming to wash it out, and he'd follow them out. And I guess as they were rinsing out all the spit and the tobacco, he'd get his gold coin and wash it off and put it away. I don't know how he washed it, but it sounds like the grossest thing to me. But that is what a cuspidor is. And if you guys want to Google cuspidor, go on Google Images and just Google vintage cuspidor, just so you can see how it looks, because it's quite interesting. I don't think I've ever seen one personally in real life. So check out what it is. What else would he do? He would perform the water from cane, the weeping coin, and making a coin vanish. So oftentimes he would order a whiskey, and the whiskey would come to him, and he'd say, "What is this? This whiskey is too strong. It needs a little bit of water." And they'd say, "Oh, we're sorry, Mr. Malini. Let me add some water for that for you." He said, No, I got it." And he'd pick up his walking cane, and he'd squeeze it a little bit at the bottom, and then it would start dripping water into his whiskey. And he said, "Oh, don't worry, I got it." He'd have a little bit of water. Another thing that he would do is he would take a coin and show it's a lady. Can you make the lady cry? I'll show you how. and he would squeeze the lady or the eagle, whichever side the audience wants to see cry, and he'd make either the eagle cry or the lady cry. Again, it was just water dripping off the coin. I actually did this in my own show, the Weeping Coin, and it is pretty visual. It's more of a close-up piece. I did it with a camera though, and the way I had it was I had the spectator putting their hand out in front because you really could not see the dripping on the camera. It was just the resolution wasn't there. The lighting messed it up, but you could see the water on their hand. So I'd squeeze it, and it'd be 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops, 4 drops on their hand, and it's quite magical, quite magical. And the reason why I had it on their hands is so they could see it dripping and they would react, and the audience could see them reacting to that magic. Then he would go into a coin vanish. Now this is funny that Vernon connects the coin vanish to the weeping coin, and I don't think he makes the connection, but it's pretty interesting. Because when you make the coin weep, it's like a part of the coin that was there is leaving. It's almost as if when you make it cry, there's a part of the coin that's leaving, at least from the imagination of the spectator. And then when you go into making the coin vanish, which is he would cover the coin with a handkerchief, the spectator holds the coin over a little glass. They drop it into the glass of water or whiskey, and they lift it up, and the coin is gone. It's a very beautiful piece. It's actually another piece that I do in my show with my own presentation, and it's just just very interesting for me to put these two pieces together, because I think they naturally lead into one another. And I was quite happy when I found out that Malini did these two tricks, maybe in the same order, because when I came up with it, I was like, wow, this is really cool. I can do this trick and this trick, and they're so like connected. And then I read the Malini book, and these tricks are right beside each other. I don't know if he did them beside each other, but it's pretty cool that maybe, just maybe, we're thinking along the same lines. I will say with this trick, it uses a little glass disc. I have done a lot of research into this trick. I'm probably one of the only people in the world that does it today. I know that David Roth used to play with it, and in the magic books, they suggest getting little pieces of plastic from flashlights. That does not work. You really need to get yourself a nice piece of glass, and you can get yourself a glass cut into the specific dimensions of a coin, or you can do what I did, which I looked online for a flat piece of glass, which was actually a watch face, the glass that they put on watches. And I went to a watchmaker, and I found out the exact size of the coin, and the thickness of it, and everything, the measurements. And they had a few in those size, so I got one that is a $50 size and one that's in a quarter size, and it is literally the perfect size, and it is a very powerful piece. So I would definitely check that out. One moment. Sorry, I just had to move some stuff. So yeah, he gives a cool method. It's from a magician with one hand or one arm. I guess he had both arms, but he couldn't use his right arm. So he only used his left arm. His name is Mac McDonald. He's pretty famous for the McDonald's Aces. If you've ever seen the McDonald's Aces trick, David Copperfield, I believe, does a version of it famously in his show, or at least he used to. You can find that online. Mac McDonald. Yeah, so he gives this version, which is really cool. Allows you to do it 2 phases. One thing I will say, the disc that you use is very important. Also, the glass. And there's a lot of things. You can actually get this to look perfect. You do need the right glass, and you need the right disc. And I don't think most magicians who wrote about this trick have actually ever done it, because in theory it's a lot more simple than it is in practice. In practice, if you look down inside that glass, or that spectator is holding glass and they can see that disc, you're screwed. Because you can see it. It's either there or it's not there. It's either visible or it's not visible. And I would say the only way to learn which glass is correct is to experiment. You just go with a little water bottle on your person, get the right size disc, and then go to a store that sells glasses and little whiskey shot glasses. Fill them up with water and drop that coin inside. If you can see that coin from either the sides or the top or the bottom, it's not going to work with that glass. You don't need a darker liquid. You don't need anything. You can get it looking invisible with water. You just need the right glass. Um, and it is a trick that you can do while you're out and about. You just need to check on the glass. So it's very easy. Order yourself a whiskey when you're at the bar. Get one of the glasses, take it to the washroom, fill it with water, test it out, and you'll know if it works or not. There is a cool transposition effect called the whiskey water transposition effect. So apparently, I don't know which one's heavier, whiskey or water. Maybe whiskey's lighter than water. I'm not sure. One of them is lighter than the other. It says at the back of the book. Let me just check quickly. Yes. Which is so apparently the whiskey is lighter than the water. I don't know how this works, but the whiskey is lighter than water. So if you get two little tumblers and you fill one to the top with whiskey, and then you fill the other one to the top with water, you put a card, like a playing card, on top of the glass of water, so it's completely covered, and it needs to be filled completely to the top. Now you hold it so that card is completely flat, and you turn it upside down so none of the water spills out. And if you put this directly over, and you line up the edges with the whiskey, you can slowly pull that card out. And what will happen is, apparently, I've never seen this, I've never done it, and I don't know anybody who does it, but what will happen is the water starts on top and the whiskey's on the bottom, and they'll actually switch places. The whiskey, they will not mix. The whiskey will go up and the water will come down. Um, it sounds incredible. I've never done it, but apparently it works. It's an old like bar bet type thing. So the next time I have a bottle of whiskey, I'm going to try it out. Although I got to be careful. Whiskey is pretty expensive, and the last thing I want to do is knock over and waste a good glass of whiskey. That would be depressing, to be quite honest. Probably have to lick that off the table. So that's a really cool thing in the book. There's a trick called the magnetic cigarette paper, in which Malini would put his walking stick, he'd balance it on a table, and then he'd move his hand over it with a piece of paper, and the walking stick would follow his command. It would move. It was like it was magnetic. And Vernon claims that Malini he hid behind a little piece of paper that he was holding, a little piece of newspaper, either an amber comb or sometimes an amber cigar holder. I don't know if amber is magnetic. I really don't. But that's apparently what he would do. What else would he do? Oh, by the way, I don't know if that's a real method. I need to look up whether amber is magnetic. Um, but there is a method which I believe is a real method. Again, in C. Lang Neil's The Modern Conjurer, and apparently you can do this with static electricity. You have to read the full method in C. Lang Neil, but apparently you can magnetize something with your body so that it moves when it's balancing, which is pretty cool. And you can do it with pencils, you can do it with sticks. So it's something that I'm going to look up later. What else do we have here? Producing page 50, we have producing a glass of beer under a hat. So everyone is familiar with the famous story of Malini producing a block of ice underneath a hat at a table. He would also produce glasses of beer. The way he would apparently do this is he would secretly go to the bar, order a beer, hold it underneath his arm of his jacket, and then he'd sit and talk and tell stories. And he'd sit for like half an hour. He'd wait. He'd always wait until it was long enough. He would never just hold something out and then produce it a few minutes later or a few seconds later. He'd wait until people had no idea where it could possibly come from. Another guy who does this is the same style is David Blaine. David Blaine has learned how to swallow frogs, and he won't just come out and produce the frogs. He'll swallow the frogs, and then he'll go have dinner, or he'll be speaking to people. He'll be with them for like an hour at a table, and then he'll produce the frogs. And they're like, "Where the hell did that come from? It comes from his mouth. Um, it comes from his stomach." So Malini had the same patience where he would hold out, just balance a glass of beer underneath his arm for as long as it took. And then he'd slide it out in between his legs. He'd say, "Let me show you a little trick. Here, we have the lady, we have the eagle. The lady eagle. It's always the lady or the eagle. Which one do you think it's going to be?" "Oh, I think lady eagle." And he'd spin the coin on the table, spin the coin, and the coin would be still spinning. He'd cover it with a hat. "Okay, which one do you think it is?" "Oh, I think it's the whatever it was." He had a way of making you feel like he had planned it all along. Whether you got it right or you got it wrong, you felt like, oh, you just felt like something was happening. And he'd wait, he'd wait, he'd wait, he'd do it again and again. And when the moment was right, he'd sneak that glass of beer underneath that hat. So as the coin was spinning, he'd put the hat gently over the coin once again. "Which one do you think now, the lady or the eagle?" They'd say. "How much do you want to bet?" "You've been getting it right. You've been getting it wrong." He'd play it up. Whatever was happening, he'd build the presentation, and then he'd lift off the hat and reveal the massive glass of beer underneath it. Really such a great trick. He would do the torn restored sort of cigarette type paper routine that's famous from Ross Bertram and other magicians, but he would do it with cigarette covers, like the little paper cover that you not cigarette straw covers. Drinking straws, they come in these little paper tubes. And sometimes when you're at a fancy restaurant or hotel, it'll have the name of the restaurant on the side of it. So he would collect these wherever he went. So if he was performing, or if he was going to a hotel, he'd already secretly have that paper in his pocket. That way, when he's having a drink at the bar, he'd tell somebody, "Hey, give me your straw," and they give him the straw, pull the paper off, pull the paper off. Okay, tear it into 4 pieces. Then they would. And he said, watch. I take the pieces like this and I rub them together. You hold that end, I hold this end, and they'd unroll it, and it'd be back in one piece. Really genius. Which page are we on? 52. Oh, also, Max Malini, apparently his favorite whiskey to drink was VAT 69. That's VAT 69. That is a type of whiskey that is still available. You can buy it online. It's pretty expensive. It's about $300 or $400 a bottle. But that's what he liked to drink. I don't know if it was that expensive back then, but whiskey changes. You probably could get it cheaper. I just think it's hard to find. That's why it's so expensive. I don't think I've ever drank it, but I'll be keeping an eye open for it the next time I go to a whiskey place. Page 53. Whenever he would do the coin transposition, the copper silver effect, um, he would put focus on the coin by tossing it from hand to hand. He would say a copper, not a copper, silver. He would say a lady, an eagle, a lady, an eagle, a lady, an eagle, a lady, an eagle, and he'd have that other coin on the counter of the table, and he'd have his extra coin palmed. So as he's showing you, he's not just showing you the coin. You're always thinking the lady, the eagle, the lady, the eagle. Here, you hold this coin. And then he'd I'll take this coin, the copper. Look, if I switch it, which one did you say you wanted? The eagle? Look, I have the eagle over here. But if the eagle's over here, what's inside your hand? Oh, you have the copper. So I just think that's an interesting note. Him going back and forth, lady and eagle, lady and eagle. There's a trick they write about called the vanishing whiskey, which apparently he would perform. I think this was more of a joke than a magic trick. This was more of an opportunity thing. But apparently he would be sitting at a bar with somebody and drinking whiskey, and he'd wait until they each ordered another round of shots of whiskey. And the bartender would come. He'd give them both their shot of whiskey. They'd pick up their shots to say cheers, and the man would pick up his shot, and his shot glass would be empty. And it'd be like, oh, what happened? Oh, so it vanished. Malini would make the alcohol vanish. The way he did this, apparently he got quite an effect out of it. The way he did this is he would just point at something. He would wait until the bartender brought the glass, and he'd already be holding his glass, talking. And he'd say, "Look, what about that painting or whatever?" And as the person was looking, Malini would chug down his glass. He'd silently put it on the table right beside them, and he'd pick up their glass and he'd be talking as if like nothing had ever happened. And then he would put his glass back down as well, and they'd talk, and he'd say, "Okay, enough talking. Let's drink." And he'd pick up his glass, cheers, and the person would pick up his glass, and it'd be empty. Just a funny effect. I don't think this was real magic effect. I don't know though. I think it's just like one of those things where it's just a magical atmosphere. It's not a fully fleshed out effect. It's just he's building this magical atmosphere. Another guy who does this often is David Blaine, also Uri Geller, Jimmy Grippo, guys like that. What do we have here? Malini at the dinner table. Apparently, Malini was good friends with a man named Bert Morey, who was Vernon's friend. I don't really know who this Bert Morey was, so I have to look into him. See if there's any records on him. Vernon now tries to describe in this section of the book the production of a block of ice. I won't go into it. It's just he has no idea how Malini uh, produced that block of ice, and because he has no idea how Malini produced that block of ice, he sort of denigrates the effect. He just pretends like Malini had this giant melting block of ice on his person, and then his whole jacket was wet. His pants were wet. He had a puddle beside him on the table, and then he produced this block of ice after half an hour of sitting with it. It makes no sense to hear Vernon tell the story, which he never saw. He admits that he. I mean, I don't believe. I don't. I do not believe. I do not believe the story from Vernon, to be honest. Um, I believe it was a very strong effect. There's one of those reasons why everybody talks about that effect today, because one, it's so unique, and then two, it's so powerful. How could Malini have produced a block of ice? Where was he hiding it? How did it not melt? He didn't produce a melting block of ice water and just slush and just throw it on the table. That's not what Malini did. Malini produced a block of ice. Let's not confuse that. This is Vernon's telling of it, which is not based in reality. Uh, we have a really cool trick on page 59 called paper knife. I would highly recommend checking that out. If you do something with a pen knife, or you do the color changing knives, this might be something that you want to add to your repertoire. This is a really interesting effect. Um, I'm not going to describe it, but read it in the book. It's really worth checking out and learning. Looks really cool. So definitely check that out. What else do we have? Or if you do magic at a dinner table, you want a trick to do at dinner, this can be easily prepared and done. It's called the paper knife. It's on page 59. We have the bill and cigarette on page 60. It's a really cool effect where you're smoking a cigarette and a bill appears in it, and he talks about how Malini would borrow cigarettes and how he would load them. It's really clever. Uh, it's really clever. Uh, yeah, there's not much more to say than that. Just really cool. Here on page 61, Vernon describes Jarrow's restored cigarette. He finally does give Jarrow the credit for this cigarette. And he says that I don't know what Vernon's relationship was like with Jarrow. Not too familiar with that, but they knew each other. Apparently, they were friends. Not great friends, since Vernon often publishes magic without his permission or without crediting him. But Malini and Jarrow would busk together when they were young, and this 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 torn and restored cigarette is really cool. I won't go through all the details just because there's no point, but it basically allows you to borrow a cigarette, break it up. You get the spectator to rip that cigarette in half. You take the tobacco from the cigarette, and then you take the paper, you rip the paper up, you bring them all together, you rub them in your hands, rub them in your hands, rub them in your hands, almost roll them. As you roll your hand back, you slowly produce a restored cigarette. It's a really cool piece. It's actually a piece that I thought about um, independently, maybe about 2 years ago, and I was going to do it for a video for a TV show, and the effect was going to be how Maddie rolls a cigarette. So it was going to be me how I roll a cigarette for real, like the technical details of actually rolling a cigarette. And then I was going to break that cigarette apart, show the different pieces, and then magically restore it. And it's really cool. I mean, it's kind of sad for me that somebody created it, but at the same time, I'm not surprised because it's such a great effect. And I'm actually honored that Jero would think of the same effect that I would think of. And his handling is so clean. It's just beautiful, and that you can actually borrow the cigarette. And he gives the details for that. So this is, just great piece of magic, especially if you are in places where people roll up the cigarettes and smoke. This is really, I mean, you can do it with a rolled up cigarette, or you can do it with a regular cigarette, that people buy in packs. The cool thing for Jaros though is you can borrow a cigarette, but from an unusual brand. He talks about how Malini did that, and because Malini was always smoking, he'd always borrow cigarettes and stuff, and then instead of putting them in his mouth and lighting them up, he'd put it in his mouth, and then he'd say, "Oh no, I don't have my light. Do you have a lighter?" And he'd switch the cigarette for another random cigarette, and then he'd light up, and no one would ever think like the guy would switch the cigarette. Like, why would you ask for a cigarette because you want to smoke and then switch it? And then he had, like, that's just the level of thinking that he was at. Really clever, really, really clever. Here we go. Malini. What page am I on here? Malini and a pack of cards. Okay, so Malini and his cards. Malini always would do his color change, never without a selection, just a color change by itself, as far as I'm aware of. And the whole thing was that he had complete mastery over the pack, that he could transform the cards into anything he wanted, which I think is a really cool thing. A lot of magicians go one step further. They want to always add more details, more of a method, more of an effect. So they want there to be a selection, and then they get the wrong card, and then they do a color change. Malini wouldn't do any of that. He would just do a color change. And I honestly believe that the color change is one of the best openers that you could ever do. You just go up to a group of people with a deck of cards and you say, "Look, let me show you this. Watch." And you do a color change. You don't have them select, name. You don't have nothing. They just watch, and you do that color change. It is so strong. He used to do 2 color changes in a row, always surrounded. His color change that he would do was from Erdnase as the expert in the card table. And it was the second method under the transformations in that book. I believe Malini did it the correct way. Most people get it wrong when they tried to learn it. Malini just brought that card from the bottom to the top and over. It's really hard for me to duplicate, but I have seen 1 or 2 people who can really do it and really understand how Malini did it and could do it that way. There's a horrible example. No offense to Paul Daniels. I really like Paul Daniels. Paul Daniels does some horrible color changes, and he's done them while he's talking about Malini on some TV program. That is definitely not the way Malini did his color change. But if you read The Expert of the Card Table, you can get the real scoop on how to do it. Page 66. Vernon again is talking about how Cardini ran into Malini. And so he describes Cardini as a very good friend of mine. Reality, as I have been told that Cardini actually hated Vernon with a passion. He was disgusted by Vernon. He was disgusted that many people looked up to Vernon, especially considering all of Vernon's thefts in the magic community and from his own friends. So it's just very funny to see him talking about Cardini, very good friend of mine. Anyways, Cardini apparently met Malini. He was working at the Gamages store in London selling magic behind the uh, counter. And he was practicing. This was before he was Cardini, by the way. He was practicing the front and back palm in front of a mirror, and he noticed a small man watching him, and he said, "Excuse me, sir, is there anything I can get you?" And the little stranger replied, "You're wasting your time. You're wasting your time." Cardini said, "Well, I'm just doing a little practicing." The little stranger took the cards and said, "If you want to vanish a card, here's the way you do it." And he suddenly held up a card and it just seemed to vanish into thin air. Both hands were empty. There was no reversing or maneuvering of any kind. The card just seemed to melt away. The little stranger dropped a visiting card face down on the counter, walked away to the lift, and went downstairs. Cardini looked around to see if the vanished card was on the floor, but it was not there. It had mysteriously disappeared. When Cardini recovered from his astonishment, he ran to the lift, went downstairs, out the store, and looked in both directions and down the street, but the stranger had gone. When Cardini returned, he turned the visiting card face up, and on it was written Max Malini. Honest to goodness, I only cheat a little. This was Cardini's only chance of ever meeting Malini, and his one regret is that he did not look at that visiting card sooner. He often comments about it to this day. Um, and from this description, somehow Vernon surmises that Malini vested the card. I don't know if that's true. I don't think he has uh, any information on it. Like, I don't think you can surmise any of those details from that. But that's what he says. I think my dog is destroying everything in my house at this moment. This is a cool little story about Cardini and Malini. Kind of sad that those two guys didn't actually get to jam, two legends of magic, but you know, I guess that's just the way things work. I wonder what year must that have been. I'll have to look at the years of when Cardini uh, was at that age where he could have been practicing that, living in London. But he must have been quite young. So just an interesting thing in magic history. Now there is there's a cool thing on page 68, which is talking about card revelations. Yeah, Vernon had an explanation for everything, really. You could just hear about magic and come up with an explanation because, he was an expert. He just knew how things worked, and he wrote books on them. I'm sorry, I don't mean to knock Vernon so much. It just kind of angers me that he would write this book when there were so many other people qualified, but he wanted the credit of pretending to know Vernon. And throughout the book, he talks about hanging out with Vernon in this place and that place, and it's just not true. Hold on, I think I'm missing one of my notes here. Yeah, that's weird. I wrote some notes that have seemed to disappear. That is so weird. That is so weird. Anyways, card revelation. Malini would do a trick where he would have multiple cards selected and he would find them, just casually in a bar. And then he would find every single card except for one person's card, and he would pretend like he just forgot, like he didn't realize it. He'd put the deck down, and he'd be like, that's enough of the magic. Let's have a little drink. And he'd order drinks, and people would whisper, "Oh, but you forgot my card," and he'd pretend not to hear them. He'd just ignore them, and then he'd wait, and they would sort of like let it go, and then he'd turn back to them. Oh, what was that thing you were saying a few minutes ago? I forgot one of your cards. The guy said, yeah, you forgot to find my card. Malini would say, okay, think of the card. They'd think of the card, and he'd pick up the deck, let the cards dribble from his hands, and produce it magically. And just like one of those things that, that delayed action of like, Malini was a master. It's like, oh, I forgot a card? Whatever, think of it. I got it. He just made people feel like magic was possible at any moment. The peak force here is really interesting. So what Malini would apparently do, and let's say there was a trick that involved counting. Let's say the card was at the 10th position or the 7th position or whatever, and they need to deal cards to get down to the spectator's card. He would deal cards face up, and as the cards were being dealt face up, Malini would remember a few cards right before they got to the selection. He would just memorize, 3 of hearts, 7 of diamonds, 6 of clubs. He'd remember the order of a few cards, maybe 3, 4 cards, whatever he could. And then he'd put that block back on top of the deck and then shuffle. So he'd get that card, finish the effect. He'd finish the effect, get the card, put that block back on top of the deck, shuffle, fall shuffle. And then he'd force them one of the cards, but he could give them a free selection. Reach in, grab one of the cards. Doesn't matter. And they'd really have a free selection of, 4 or 5 cards, depending on how he spread it. They'd grab one of those cards, and he'd be able to know which card it was because he just memorized that little 5-card block. And apparently he fooled a lot of magicians with this. So page 72, really interesting. Vernon admits to using Charlie Miller. So I have a theory, which is that Max Malini didn't really know Vernon. He didn't really care for Vernon. Charlie Miller was sort of used his whole life as a little spy for Vernon. I don't know too much. I don't want to knock Charlie Miller. He was a private person, but he would definitely pass a lot of information on to Vernon, which Vernon would then publish and get credit for. And this happened, Charlie Miller telling Vernon secrets of tricks, magic tricks about friends of Charlie's. And that he would tell everything to Vernon, and Vernon would run and publish it. And this is sort of what happened in L.A. Charlie Miller was hanging around Malini because Malini was working in L.A. For about 6 months before he made his final trip to Honolulu. And apparently Charlie Miller had many chances to watch Malini working. So Charlie would watch Malini performing and then write letters and send them back to Vernon. How Malini would do his side steal, how he would do this, how he would watch him. And it's just really kind of creepy. If you realize what's happening, it's just sort of creepy because you realize that Vernon couldn't have had access to a lot of this information by himself. So he used Charlie Miller to get close and get this information so that he could have it. And this was a pattern with Vernon and Charlie Miller. So, I mean, I'm not going to treat Charlie Miller like he was a child. He also knew what he was doing, and he knew what Vernon was doing with the information. I mean, he wasn't stupid. He was seeing Vernon write different stuff up, publish stuff. I don't know if he talked to Vernon about it. I don't know what his general attitude was about it, but they were um, they were working. They were colluding. There was collusion. Uh, so that is slightly depressing. Now moving on to page 77, we have Malini confronting Vernon. He said that Vernon says that Malini was a very sensitive character and used to resent anybody doing tricks in his presence, especially if they in any way resembled any of his magic. Vernon then says, I remember on one occasion when I was in Miami, I had an important engagement at the Charles Gables Hotel. At that time, the Charles Gables was quite a place. It was during the boom time in Florida, and this was a very large and important social affair. I had to entertain both at the nightclub connected to the hotel and at the hotel itself, so I had to have an entire change of program. Naturally, I want to perform strong tricks, so I included the card stabbing trick, not with 8 cards or 10 cards as Malini did, but with 3 cards. A few days later, I went to the McAllister Hotel, met Malini in the lobby, and we stayed talking in the lounge for some time. Suddenly, Malini turned to me and said, Vernon, I don't want you to do my tricks. I replied, Max, I haven't been doing any of your tricks. But, he replied, you've been doing the stabbing trick, and I don't want you to do it. I said, well, Max, I don't do that trick very often, but I do perform it sometimes with 1 card. However, the other night I did it with 3 cards. He insisted, you're doing my trick. Don't do it. I felt very entitled to say, well, Max, after all, it's not really your trick. This trick is a very old one. The divining rod. It's been described in Erdnase and many other words on cards. His reply was, not with more than 1 card. I admitted, well, that's probably true. I never heard of it being described with more than 1 card. His next words were, that's my trick. Don't do it. I don't I did not prolong the argument, for I rather admired the way he stood up for what he considered to be his own rights. And he goes on and on. Uh, by the way, you're saying Miller also shared a lot of information about Walter Scott with Vernon. It's very interesting. You know, Vernon claimed to be interested in gambling experts and traveling all over the world trying to search for people who could do perfect gambling moves. And yet he never was interested in going to see Walter Scott. And I can't talk too much about it because I think somebody's working on telling the story. But I think it's very telling that Vernon did not want to be in the same room with a real, actual card expert. Because all these other experts that Vernon met and talked to, Alan Kennedy and so on and so forth, there's nobody else who talked to them. I mean, and with Vernon, you just don't know what he made up and what he didn't make up. I mean, so much of it is fake that it's hard to discern fiction from reality with Vernon. I mean, Vernon claims that he may have met Erdnase as a child, and like it's just pure lunacy at some point. Uh, okay, so this is very interesting. This is very interesting. Why did Vernon write the story about Malini confronting him? I think there's probably another incentive behind it. I believe that probably Vernon did steal um, part of the card stabbing routine, and he tried to perform it as his own. And when Malini heard about it, Malini got super angry and started telling everybody, "Stay away from that Vernon guy. He's a creep. He's stealing my material. He's performing it." And after Malini died, Vernon conveniently came up with this story where he talked to Malini about it, and Malini told him his version. Because why else would he tell the story? There's no other reason for him to tell the story in the book. It doesn't make him look good. It doesn't make Malini look good. There's no conclusion. It doesn't make sense to write it the way that he's writing it, other than if Di Vernon was trying to protect himself. I believe that he probably was in a situation where Malini said something to people about Vernon, such as Vernon did steal some tricks of his, and he didn't want to be around Vernon. That's the only reason why I think Vernon would write a story like this in the book. It doesn't make sense to include the story otherwise. Also, Vernon's constantly attacking Malini in the book, but in a very subtle way. Like he looks up to them, but then he's also saying, "Yeah, Malini drank all his life, and he would slip up, and that's how Charlie Miller, would catch him do some tricks and some because he would sometimes screw up because he was too drunk." It's possible. I just don't. I don't know about that. Um, The rest of the book is about Malidi promoting his show, promoting himself. It's very interesting. And then just stories about him. The stories about him are sort of legendary. How he got people to do stuff for him, how friendly he was. It really is a jewel to read the end of this book. I think the best part of this book is the end, where they're not talking about magic methods, but it's Fawcett Ross and other people telling stories about it. Of course, Vernon comes in and ruins everything at different parts. Like I just don't get it. Like for example, there's a story about how Malini got this rare ivory carving from a South American dealer, and Fawcett Ross tells the story, and then Di Vernon says, I would like to. Here's what Di Vernon adds. There's a note. I would like to add to that story you told about the South American art dealer, because I too heard that story when I was in that part of the country. Without knowing the full facts, I think the readers might find it difficult to believe that this man would give Malini such a valuable item, which was actually a carving of the Last Supper. There are only two such carvings in the world. I understand the other one is in the Vatican in Rome. Uh, and then uh, he basically tells a story that he just admits to not knowing the story. So he says, look, he says over here, this is page 85. He says, it is most likely that during this evening, when Malini had performed for the dealer, they had some drinks, and the dealer was in a carefree and generous mood. He said, Max, you come down to my store tomorrow morning, and you can pick out anything that you fancy, anything in the store. I don't care what it is, a lamp, an antique, a painting, anything you want. It goes through this whole like fantasy of how this story unfolded when he's not there. Um, so it's interesting. I don't think Malini was a douchebag. Uh, it's funny. I think he was just a rough guy who was beloved his by the people who knew him. He would never work for free. There's a great story that I think it's Edwin Derns tells at the end of the book, about Malini, um, saying how people uh, would would invite him to their house for dinner, and then they would expect him to perform and tell stories. So he would never go to people's houses socially. He would only go if he was hired because he didn't want that expectation on him to work for free. He felt that it devalued him as a performer. He also had a lot of balls. Like there's a story in here how he approached this Fisher company that produced all the car bodies by General Motors, Fisher Body Works. They were having this big lavish party, sort of akin to what you would see in The Great Gatsby. They were spending $150,000 on that party back then. So this was a big, expensive party. They booked all the talent. They had a big lineup, 21 acts and MC, everything. Then they got to the night before the show or the week before the show. Malini had heard about the party. He storms into the offices, gets past the secretaries, gets past the vice president, and somehow ends up in the president's office, introduces himself, pulls out a scrapbook with his, this is who I performed for. I'm the great Max Malini. And this is me performing for the king, the queen, the president. And they're like, wow, you're amazing. And he's like, look, I want to perform at this party that you're throwing. And the guy says, Malini, I want you to be there, but it's impossible. I just booked everything. We had this all organized. I can't add you. We've set the budget. Like we can't do anything. And Malini says, look, here's what we'll do, because he didn't like to take no for an answer. Here's what we'll do. You will say yes. I will come to your party. I will perform after everybody else. I'll wait until everybody else has performed. I will perform, and if you think I do a good job, you pay me. If it's not as good as anybody else, if there's somebody in the show that's better, you don't pay me nothing. I come for a good time. So the president, says yes. How can you refuse? Basically, Malini says, I'm going to perform whether you like it or not. I'm coming to that party and I'm performing. And if I do a good job, you're going to give me $2,000. And so the night comes, and the show runs over time. There's 21 acts. Show's over. The MC says, we have one last performer tonight. He wasn't on the lineup, but he's a last-minute addition. His name is Mr. Malini, and Mr. Malini, come on out. And Malini came out. He waddled out onto the platform carrying a small table on which he had his cards, his tumblers, a bowl of eggs, and he began his performance, about 30 minutes. And at the end of the performance, he not only received multiple standing ovations, he literally had the audience on their feet cheering. And this is not an exaggeration, but a recorded fact. It goes without saying that he collected his $2,000 and, in addition, became a close friend of the Fisher brothers, who booked him for many future functions. Just a great, that's who he was. I mean, Malini was tough. He didn't take no for an answer. Yeah, he wasn't friends with everybody, but he was a very friendly guy. If you could help him in his life. And I think most people are like that. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just he didn't want to waste his time. He didn't want to be around magicians. A lot of magicians who are successful don't want to be too much around magicians. You look at the best magicians in the last century. Houdini. Let's say Malini. Let's say Rene Levon. Let's say Uri Geller. Let's say Jimmy Grippo. Let's say David Blaine, David Copperfield, Darren Brown. Those guys are not spending all their days and nights hanging out with magicians. Those guys are working. They're thinking. They're really designing and developing themselves as magicians. And I think one of the reasons why they get bad reputations sometimes is because people have a little bit of like jealousy, and they're they're like, oh, this person thinks he's too good to be our friends. And I know that people felt that way about Rene Levant. Rene Levant didn't want to have anything to do with magicians for the most part. He had a couple magician friends, but he knew what was going on in the magic community, the stealing, the jealousy, and he just didn't want to be a part of it. And I can totally understand that. So I think that's sort of what Malini faced. Uh, as we go on, there's there's a lot more details. I think we've been going on long enough. This is about like 3 hours we're going on. One last thing I just want to say, just before we finish the book, if I can leave you with anything, one thing, I'll talk about this later. Malini was a legendary guy. He was one of the only magicians who ever lived who made people really believe that he could do magic. The magic was real. And it's a thing that's rare, and it's becoming more and more rare as time goes on. And it's something so important to what we do, and it's something that's not taken seriously. It's not something most of these magicians just perform to have a good show or to have a good set. Malini really designed his life about magic, around magic, and he got criticized for that a lot. But there's nobody who attacked his ability, even if they said that his technique wasn't good in some ways. They still couldn't deny the fact that everything he did worked, even though when he would palm cards that they would protrude from his hands, or they can't knock the quality of his performances. He was just a legendary performer, and everybody loved him. That's why he got booked by all the presidents in the world, by all the kings and queens and royalty, from Europe to Asia to England to just all over the place. And that's who Malini was. There's, for me, only a few guys who have followed in his footsteps. Jimmy Grippo. If you don't know who Jimmy Grippo is, it's a shame. And Jimmy Grippo was a Malini type character. There's no great books written on Jimmy Grippo, but I know Jimmy Grippo's only student, and I know guys who were friends with Jimmy Grippo. He was a Malini type character, absolutely a legendary guy, followed fully in the footsteps of Malini, not known to the public, but known to all the upper class, the rich business people, presidents, and so on. Jimmy Grippo followed in the footsteps of Malini. After that, a little bit different, but Uri Geller, I would say, also followed a different sense magically, but removing Uri Geller from that list, the next guy who really followed in the footsteps of Malini, the only other guy other than Jimmy Grippo right now is David Blaine. David Blaine really worked himself up to the point where he can perform for royalty, and he can perform for the elite in the society, the richest business people, the people who control the financial and social world, and celebrities, all those things. It is quite interesting how people have their domains. David Blaine is interesting because he's crossed over into television, so the public knows him as well. I really think that there's differences between them. Obviously, the character, the ways they perform, but there really are not enough guys like this. And this guy was one of a kind. This is the only book that's been written on him, and it's a shame. I mean, look at this. One of the greatest magicians who ever lived. This is his book. I mean, this is not even 100 pages, and most of it is disappointing, to say the least. I am doing a project based on Malini. I want to collect more of his methods. I want to collect his real show, his real story. He had an incredible life performing all over the world, and it's just gone. Malini wrote an autobiography titled Just Malini. I am right now working on tracking it down. I know who has it. There's at least one person who has a copy, and I'm not too sure. I need to talk to some people. I can't really talk too much about it right now, but it's an autobiography by Malini that's never been published. I have to figure out what's happening. I just personally want to keep it safe. I want to make sure that it's not destroyed. I don't know if it will ever be published, but it should be published. His work and his life story deserves to be written about. There's articles written about Malini in magazines from time to time, cover stories even, which do, a job at talking about him, but it's not the full story of his life. Malini could easily fill 20 volumes of this with just his magic alone, and another 20 with his life and stories. This is all there is, and it's kind of a lesson. This is what happens when you are good. This is what happens when you're important and you work hard and you work more on creating art than your legacy. This is what happens. So, a guy like Vernon has a massive legacy. He has many books in his name and many books about him and his magic and life story. And a guy like Malini, who was, in my mind, 100 times more of an artist, this is all he has. So it's kind of depressing for me, to be honest, to read this and to study this. But at the same time, it is all we have. And we have more sources, and I'm discovering more things. So you can get this book. It's pretty hard to find a copy, but it's worth its weight. Whatever you pay for it, it's not too expensive. It's definitely worth the asking price. I'm not too sure how much this is going for. But do yourself a favor, buy a copy, because I doubt it will ever be reprinted. I wonder if it's still in copyright. I am really curious. But that's it. That's the book. And if you guys have questions, I think we only have one person here right now. This is the first book club. I mean, I just announced this a few days ago. There's a few more people who subscribed, but they're probably not here live. They'll probably watch this in retrospect. Even if you guys are watching this after the fact, please write comments, leave comments. We can have this discussion within the platform of Patreon privately for the book club members. I would really like that. What else is there? The next book club book. I forget what I wrote. Maybe I wrote Tarbell. I know Tarbell's in there. I forget what I wrote, but there's another book coming that we'll study in about 2 weeks from now. So I will get to work on reading that. I do appreciate you guys sitting through this with me. I know that this is sort of long format, and I know that I sort of went through the whole book. I won't do this with every book. It's just I really had to do my best to talk about this book because there's so much in it and so much that's interesting to me and important to me. Anyways, is it worth even that some of the part of it is made up? Yeah, get the book. It's worth it. Even though, Vernon, even though I don't like that Vernon made up all the stuff that he made up, I'm glad that he wrote this book. Because if Vernon, if this book wasn't written, then we would have even less information about Malini than we have. And we already have so little information. So as much of lies and discrepancies and, all those things that I hate are in this book, I'm grateful that it exists. It's frustrating. I have mixed emotions about it, but you know, that's the way it is. And I can't do anything about that. Guys, it has been a real pleasure. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I really had a great time. I really, really did. And it's important for me to be able to share this stuff for myself and to make a record of it because many times I read stuff, I forget. So this allows me to create notes and also share it to you guys in video format, which is also useful for me because I can then look back and see where my head was at and compare it to new research and different stuff that I find as time goes on. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you did, please let some of your friends know so we can turn this into a little group and yeah, get together every few weeks and work on it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this. This is my first time going this in depth in a video on a book, and I had notes that I didn't cover everything, but I could really sit down and talk about this book for 10 hours, but I think we covered the most important stuff. I eventually do want to. I do have another group on Patreon. So this is a book club, which is $5 a month. I have another group which is $10 a month. It's called Studies in Magic Group, and I believe for this month we will be talking about a Malini piece that I am working on, and so we'll get into that. I don't think it'll be 3 hours. It might be an hour, 2 hours. I'm not too sure, but try to fit everything in. Not too sure the date on that, but I will let you guys know on the page and talk to you guys soon. It's really been fun. Thank you for joining me. I had a blast. And sorry about the live stream. Gosh, sorry about the live stream. My internet really screwed up. And then I was talking to my camera for about half an hour, not realizing that the live stream had closed. So that was embarrassing. So yeah, it's been a long day. Anyways, guys, enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you on the other side. Peace.